You don't belong in that seat. That leather is for the owner, not the help. Move to the jump seat in the back, or get off my aircraft." That was the last thing Captain Richard Sterling said to the woman sitting in seat 1A on a snowy Christmas Eve at Teterboro Airport. He thought he was disciplining a disrespectful nanny. He thought he was protecting the integrity of the pristine Gulfstream G700 he commanded. But Captain Sterling made a fatal calculation that night. He didn't check the tail number registration. If he had, he would have realized that the woman in the hoodie wasn't the help. She was Audrey Caroline, the billionaire tech mogul who had just bought the plane, the airline, and his career. And today, inside this courtroom, she's about to remind him exactly who signs the checks. The atmosphere inside the Superior Court of New Jersey was suffocating, a stark contrast to the biting December wind rattling the window panes outside. The wood-paneled walls seemed to absorb the tension, holding it thick in the air like humidity before a storm. On the witness stand sat Captain Richard Sterling. He looked every inch the quintessential aviator, square-jawed, silver hair swept back with military precision, and a suit that cost more than most people's cars. He adjusted his silk tie, his posture rigid, exuding a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He wasn't here as a defendant. Not technically. He was the plaintiff. He was suing for wrongful termination and defamation of character, asking for $5 million in damages. Opposite him, at the defense table, sat Audrey Caroline. She was unrecognizable from the, quote, disheveled woman described in the court documents. Today, she wore a sharp navy power suit, her hair pulled back in an elegant twist. She didn't look at Sterling. She was busy taking notes on a yellow legal pad, her expression unreadable, calm, almost bored. Captain Sterling, his lawyer, a man named Arthur Pendleton with a voice like oiled gravel, began. "Please tell the jury what happened on the night of December 24th at Teterboro Airport." Sterling cleared his throat, leaning into the microphone. He turned his charm on the jury, offering a weary, sympathetic smile. "It was Christmas Eve," Sterling began, his voice baritone and smooth. "Weather conditions were deteriorating rapidly. We were looking at a heavy icing event on the wings. I was the pilot in command of a Gulfstream G700, tail number N700EV. For those who don't know, that is the pinnacle of private aviation. A $75 million machine. It requires absolute precision and protocol to operate safely." "And what was your mindset that night?" Pendleton asked. "Safety," Sterling said instantly. "My only priority is the safety of the vessel and the principal passenger. We were scheduled for a transatlantic flight to London. The manifest listed the owner, E. Caroline, as the primary passenger. I had flown for the previous owner, Mr. Charles Whitmore, for 6 years. When the plane was sold, I was retained. I expected the new owner to be, well, of a certain caliber. And when you boarded the aircraft to conduct your pre-flight checks, what did you find?" Sterling's eyes narrowed slightly as he glanced toward Audrey. "I found a breach of protocol. I entered the main cabin and found an unauthorized individual lounging in the principal seat, seat 1A. It's the forwardmost starboard seat, usually reserved for the owner because it offers control over the cabin management system. Describe this individual for the court." "She was wearing a gray, oversized hoodie, sweatpants, and sneakers," Sterling said, letting a disdainful chuckle escape. "She had headphones on, feet up on the ottoman. She looked like staff. Perhaps a nanny or a personal assistant sent ahead to prep the cabin. But she was eating crackers, crumbs falling onto the beige cashmere upholstery. It was a complete lack of respect for a $75 million asset." "Did you approach her?" "I did. I am the captain. My word is law on that ship. I approached her and politely informed her that she was in the wrong seat. I told her that the principal, Mr. Caroline, as I assumed at the time, would be arriving shortly and that she needed to vacate the VIP area immediately." "And how did she respond?" "She ignored me, Sterling lied smoothly. The jury leaned in. She didn't even take off her headphones, so I had to raise my voice. I told her to move to the jump seat in the galley, or the aft divan, if she was part of the traveling staff. I was trying to maintain order. We had a slot time to hit. I couldn't have the owner arriving to find his assistant making a mess of his jet. So, you were doing your job? I was protecting the owner's investment, Sterling stated firmly. I ordered her to move. That is when she became belligerent. She refused to comply with a direct order from the pilot in command. In aviation law, that is a federal offense. I had no choice but to escalate. Audrey's lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Marcus Thorne, stood up slowly. He didn't object. He just watched Sterling with the predatory patience of a shark sensing blood in the water. "Thank you, Captain," Pendleton said, satisfied. "So, to be clear, you were fired for trying to enforce safety and protocol on a subordinate who refused to listen?" "Exactly," Sterling sighed. "I was terminated the next morning via email. No hearing, no discussion. Just kicked to the curb after 30 years of unblemished service because, well, frankly, because the new owner didn't like that I disciplined her entitlement." Sterling looked at the jury, his eyes glistening with practiced sincerity. "I lost my pension. I lost my reputation. I'm blacklisted at NetJets, FlexJet, VistaJet. Nobody will touch me, all because I did my job." The courtroom was silent. The jury looked sympathetic. A hard-working pilot, a rude billionaire, a misunderstanding on Christmas Eve. It seemed like an open-and-shut case of wrongful termination. Audrey Caroline stopped writing. She clicked her pen, the sound echoing in the quiet room. She looked up at Marcus Thorne and gave a barely perceptible nod. Thorne walked toward the podium. He was holding a remote control. "Captain Sterling," Thorne said, his voice pleasant. "You testified that the plaintiff, my client, was belligerent, and that you politely asked her to move. Is that your sworn testimony?" "It is," Sterling said, bristling. "And you are aware," Thorne continued, "that the Gulfstream G700, specifically the N700 EV, is equipped with a high-definition cabin security system that records audio and video for insurance purposes?" The color drained from Captain Sterling's face so fast it looked like a physical blow. I assumed the system was offline during pre-flight," Sterling stammered. "It wasn't," Thorne smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. "Your Honor, I would like to submit Exhibit A into evidence. The cabin surveillance footage from December 24, 2023. Let's see how polite Captain Sterling really was. December 24, 2023. Teterboro Airport, KTEB, New Jersey. The wind at Teterboro was vicious, a biting nor'easter that turned the tarmac into a sheet of black ice. Private jets sat in rows like sleeping leviathans, their white fuselages stark against the gray, swirling sky. A black SUV pulled up to the FBO fixed-base operator ramp, bypassing the main terminal entirely. The driver, a large man in a suit, opened the rear door. Audrey Caroline stepped out. She didn't look like the CEO of Caroline Oryx Systems, a company that provided cybersecurity for half the Fortune 500. She looked tired. She had just closed the deal of the decade, acquiring the aviation fleet of a bankrupt competitor, and hadn't slept in 30 hours. She wore her travel armor, a cashmere hoodie that cost $2,000, though it looked generic, Lululemon joggers, and vintage sneakers. "Do you want me to carry your bag to the stairs, Miss Caroline?" the driver asked. "No, I've got it. Heavy is good for the soul," she joked, shivering as the snow hit her face. "Go home to your family. Heavy traffic tonight." She grabbed her duffel bag and walked toward the massive Gulfstream G700, parked under the floodlights. It was beautiful, sleek, powerful, with the longest range in its class. She had bought it 3 days ago. She hadn't even met the crew yet. They were holdovers from the acquisition contract. She climbed the air stairs, the cold metal biting through her gloves. The cabin attendant wasn't at the door, likely inside prepping the galley. Audrey stepped inside. The warmth of the cabin hit her instantly, smelling of expensive leather and fresh coffee. She walked past the galley and dropped into seat 1A. It was the best seat in the house. She kicked off her wet sneakers, curled her legs up, and put on her noise-canceling headphones. She didn't turn music on. She just wanted the silence. She closed her eyes, finally safe. She wasn't eating crackers. She was drinking a bottle of water. Suddenly a shadow fell over her. She opened one eye. A man in a pilot's uniform was looming over her. He was tall, broad, and looking at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. It was Captain Sterling. Audrey slid her headphones down around her neck. "Hi! You must be the captain. Get up!" Sterling barked. Audrey blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said, get up," Sterling said, his voice loud enough to rattle the crystal in the galley. "Who let you on board? The cleaning crew was supposed to be finished an hour ago." Audrey sat up straighter, the fatigue replaced by confusion. "I'm not the cleaning crew. I'm the passenger." Sterling laughed. It was a cruel barking sound. "The passenger? Listen to me, sweetheart. The passenger is Mr. Caroline. And knowing men like him, he doesn't appreciate the help lounging in his seat, getting grease on the upholstery." "Mr. Caroline," Audrey repeated calmly. "Captain, I think you're confused. There is no Mr. Caroline. I am E. Caroline." Sterling leaned in, invading her personal space. He pointed a finger inches from her face. "Don't lie to me. I've been flying Billionaires since you were in diapers. I know what an owner looks like, and I know what a diversity hire looks like. You're the nanny, or maybe the assistant, and you're trying to live the high life before the boss shows up." Audrey's heart rate slowed. This was a familiar battlefield. She had dealt with men like Sterling in boardrooms for 10 years, men who couldn't process that a black woman under 40 could own the building they were standing in. "Captain," she said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming steel, "I advise you to lower your finger and check your manifest again. My name is Audrey Caroline. I own this plane. I own the LLC that pays your salary." Sterling's face turned red. "You listen to me, you little brat. I am the captain of this vessel. My authority is absolute. I don't care who you claim to be. You are a security risk. Now, you have two choices. You can move your ass to the jump seat in the back and sit in silence until the real owner arrives, or I can call airport security and have you dragged off onto the tarmac in the snow. Which is it?" Audrey stared at him. She looked at the gold bars on his shoulders. She looked at the sneer on his face. She realized he wasn't just mistaken. He was enjoying this. He liked the power. He liked putting her in her place. "You're ordering me to the back of the plane?" she asked softly. "I'm ordering you to your place," Sterling spat. "Seat 1A is for VIPs, not for you. Move, now." Audrey stood up. She was 5'7", much shorter than him, but in that moment, she seemed to fill the cabin. She picked up her bag. "Okay," she said. Sterling smirked, crossing his arms. Finally, some compliance. "I'll move," Audrey said, walking past him toward the door. "Wrong way. Jump seat is back there," Sterling called out mockingly. Audrey stopped at the open cabin door. The snow was swirling violently outside. She turned back to look at him one last time. "I'm not going to the jump seat, Captain. I'm going to the FBO to fire you, and then I'm going to find a pilot who knows how to read a registration document." Sterling rolled his eyes. "Yeah, sure. Go tell on me. See if I care. Happy holidays." Audrey walked down the stairs into the cold. Back in the courtroom, the video froze on Sterling's sneering face, his hand pointing at the door. The silence in the Superior Court was absolute. It was the silence of a grave. Marcus Thorne turned off the screen. He looked at the jury, then at Sterling, who was now gripping the railing of the witness stand so hard his knuckles were white. "The help. Diversity hire." "Your place." Thorne repeated the words, letting them hang in the air. "Captain Sterling, you testified under oath 5 minutes ago that you were polite. You testified she was eating crackers. You testified she was belligerent." Thorne walked closer to the witness stand. "But the video shows a woman sitting quietly, drinking water, who tried to identify herself as the owner twice. And you threatened to have her dragged into the snow. Thorne leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that the microphones caught perfectly. Tell me, Captain, when you looked at Ms. Caroline, you didn't see a billionaire, did you? You just saw a black woman in a hoodie. And on Christmas Eve, you decided to teach her a lesson. Is that accurate? Sterling opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The trap had snapped shut. But the real twist was yet to come. Audrey hadn't just fired him. She had prepared something much worse for his defense. The silence in the courtroom wasn't empty. It was heavy, pressing down on the lungs of everyone present. The video screen had gone black, but the image of Captain Richard Sterling sneering at the woman in the hoodie seemed burned into the retinas of the jury. Marcus Thorne, Audrey's attorney, didn't speak immediately. He was a master of the, quote, pregnant pause. He walked back to his table, picked up a glass of water, took a slow, deliberate sip, and then turned back to Sterling. He treated the witness stand like an operating table where he was about to perform a vivisection without anesthesia. Mr. Caroline, Thorne said, repeating the phrase Sterling had used in the video. You were quite insistent on that specific honorific, weren't you, Captain? Sterling shifted in his seat. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a sheen of sweat on his upper lip. It was a reasonable assumption. In the world of high-net-worth aviation, the principle is, statistically, usually male. Statistically? Thorne raised an eyebrow. Interesting. Tell me, Captain, in your 30 years of flying, have you ever heard of Oprah Winfrey? Rihanna? Sarah Blakely? Objection. Arthur Pendleton grunted from the plaintiff's table. Audrey Caroline. Goes to state of mind, Your Honor, Thorne countered smoothly. The plaintiff claims he was acting on safety protocols. I am establishing that his protocols are based on bias, not aviation regulations. Overruled, the judge said, peering over her glasses at Sterling. Answer the question. I know who they are, Sterling muttered, loosening his tie. It looked like a noose around his neck. So you are aware that women, black women, can afford a Gulfstream G700? Yes, but not this woman? Thorne interrupted, his voice sharpening. He walked closer, resting a hand on the wooden railing of the witness box. Let's talk about the safety risk you mentioned. In the video, Ms. Caroline is sitting down. Her hands are visible. She is not shouting. She is not brandishing a weapon. She is drinking Fiji water. Please explain to the jury, specifically, what federal offense she was committing. Sterling looked at the jury. He saw no sympathy there anymore. He saw judgment. She refused a direct order from the PIC, pilot in command. Under FAA Regulation 91.3, the pilot has final authority to manage the safety of the flight. Thorne finished for him. Not to manage the seating arrangements based on his personal prejudices. Did you ask for her ID? I didn't have time. We had a slot. You had time to lecture her, Thorne noted. You had time to threaten to drag her into the snow. But you didn't have time to ask, may I see your boarding pass? Thorne walked back to his podium and flipped a page in his binder. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Let's dig deeper, Captain. You claimed in your opening statement that you were protecting the integrity of the asset, that you didn't want the help messing up the leather. Thorne looked up, his eyes cold. Are you aware that Audrey Caroline holds a master's degree in aerospace engineering from MIT? Sterling blinked. No. Are you aware that she personally designed the cybersecurity encryption protocols used by the very avionics system inside that Gulfstream? No. So, Thorne said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. The woman you called to help knows more about that plane than you do. She built the code that keeps it in the air. And yet, because she was wearing a hoodie, you decided she belonged in the back. I was protecting the owner's image, Sterling snapped, his temper fraying. You don't understand the culture! Appearances matter! If a client sees someone looking like a slob in seat 1A, it devalues the service. And there it is, Thorne said softly. He turned to the jury. He wasn't protecting the plane. He was protecting his own snobbery. He looked at my client and decided she wasn't quality enough for the front seat. Thorne paused, letting the statement sink in. Then he delivered the pivot that changed the trajectory of the trial. Captain Sterling, you are suing for wrongful termination and defamation. You claim my client ruined your reputation. But isn't it true that this isn't the first time you've had a conflict regarding a passenger of color? Pendleton shot up from his seat. Objection! Prior bad acts are inadmissible. This goes to a pattern of behavior, Your Honor, Thorne argued. It proves that his actions on Christmas Eve weren't a mistake. They were a habit. The judge considered this, tapping her pen on the bench. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Mr. Thorne. Thorne smiled. It was not a nice smile. Captain, do you recall a flight in 2019, flying a Bombardier Global 6000 for a music producer out of Atlanta? Sterling went pale. Even his ears turned white. That was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding where you called the client's mother aggressive and threatened to divert the flight because she asked you to turn up the cabin heat? She was shouting! Sterling cried. We have the affidavit from the cabin attendant on that flight, Captain. She states, the woman whispered. Thorne slammed the binder shut. You have a history, Captain Sterling. You don't see passengers. You see stereotypes. And on Christmas Eve, you finally did it to the wrong woman. You didn't just insult a passenger. You insulted the boss. And now, you want her to pay you $5 million for the privilege? Thorne turned his back on the witness. No further questions. Sterling sat there, panting slightly, looking like a man who had just crash-landed without a parachute. The recess was tense. In the hallway, Arthur Pendleton was whispering furiously to Sterling, his face red. Sterling looked like a deflated balloon, staring at the floor, his hands trembling as he held a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee. Inside the courtroom, Audrey Caroline sat perfectly still. She didn't look triumphant. She looked focused. This wasn't a game to her. It was a necessary excision of a tumor. The defense calls Audrey Caroline to the stand. Marcus Thorne announced when the court reconvened. Audrey stood. The movement was fluid, graceful. As she walked to the stand, the jury's eyes followed her. They were trying to reconcile the woman in the video. Hoodie, sneakers, relaxed, with a titan of industry standing before them in a structured navy blazer. She took the oath, her voice clear and resonant, lacking the tremor that Sterling had shown. Marcus Thorne approached her gently. This was the soft phase of the strategy. Humanize the billionaire. Miss Caroline, can you tell the court why you were at Teterboro Airport on Christmas Eve? Audrey folded her hands in her lap. I had just completed the acquisition of a logistics firm in London. The deal was closing on December 26th. I needed to be there to sign the papers physically. It was a deal that saved 4,000 jobs from redundancy. If I didn't make that flight, the financing would have collapsed. So the stakes were high? Extremely. It wasn't a vacation. It was a rescue mission. And why the attire? Captain Sterling seemed very offended by your sweatpants. Audrey allowed herself a small, dry smile. I had been in negotiations for 36 hours straight. I hadn't slept. When I fly private, I don't do it for the champagne or the status. I do it for the efficiency. I wanted to sleep. I dressed for sleep. I didn't realize there was a dress code for owning my own aircraft. A few jurors smiled. They liked her. She was relatable, despite the billions. Ms. Caroline, Thorne continued, when Captain Sterling ordered you to move, why didn't you just pull out your phone and show him the purchase contract? Why didn't you scream, do you know who I am? Audrey's expression turned serious. She looked directly at the jury. Because, Mr. Thorne, I shouldn't have to. I told him my name. I told him I was the owner. If I were a 60-year-old white man in a suit, simply saying, I am Mr. Caroline, would have been enough. He would have apologized immediately. But because of what I look like, my word wasn't enough. My presence wasn't enough. He required proof that I belonged there. To engage in that argument, to scramble for papers to prove I have a right to exist in my own space, is to accept his premise that I am suspicious by default. I refuse to accept that premise. It was a powerful statement. The invisible capital argument. The courtroom was silent. "Thank you, Miss Caroline." Thorne sat down. Now it was Arthur Pendleton's turn. Sterling's lawyer stood up, buttoning his jacket. He was an old-school brawler, and he knew his only chance was to make Audrey look arrogant, vindictive, and cruel. "Ms. Caroline," Pendleton began, his voice grating. "That's a very pretty speech. But let's look at the facts. You fired a man with 30 years of experience via email on Christmas morning. On Christmas. Does that sound like the action of a benevolent leader?" "It sounds like the action of a CEO who identified a liability," Audrey replied coolly. "A liability," Pendleton scoffed. "Captain Sterling has flown heads of state. He has flown royalty. And you fired him because he hurt your feelings?" "I fired him because he demonstrated a catastrophic lack of situational awareness," Audrey said, her voice remaining level. "A pilot who cannot verify the identity of the person sitting in the cockpit's blind spot is a security risk. A pilot who escalates a conflict with a passenger rather than de-escalating is a liability. And a pilot who treats people with contempt based on their appearance is a lawsuit waiting to happen. I didn't fire him for hurting my feelings, Mr. Pendleton. I fired him to protect my company from exactly this kind of situation." Pendleton wasn't deterring. He stepped closer, leaning on the podium. "You felt humiliated, didn't you? He embarrassed you. He treated you like a servant, and your ego couldn't take it. So you decided to destroy him. You blacklisted him, didn't you?" "I shared my experience with the flight management company," Audrey said. "They made their own decisions." "Come now, Miss Caroline," Pendleton sneered. "You are one of the most powerful women in tech. You snapped your fingers, and his career turned to dust. You enjoyed it." "I take no pleasure in termination," Audrey said, "but I demand competence." Pendleton walked back to his table and picked up a piece of paper. He held it up like a weapon. "You demand competence, or do you demand submission? We have a witness statement here from a former personal assistant of yours, a Ms. Chloe Davis. She claims that you are demanding, cold, and impossible to please. She claims you once fired a driver for making eye contact with you in the rearview mirror." Audrey didn't flinch. "Ms. Davis was let go for embezzling corporate funds. Her testimony is hardly reliable." Pendleton faltered. He hadn't expected her to counter that so quickly. He needed a win. He needed to shake her. "Let's go back to the plane," Pendleton pressed. "You said you were tired. Maybe you weren't thinking clearly. Maybe you were the one who was rude. Maybe Captain Sterling was just trying to do his job and you, in your exhausted, emotional state, overreacted." "I was exhausted," Audrey agreed. "But I was not emotional. I was analyzing." "Analyzing what?" "Analyzing whether I wanted to trust my life at 45,000 feet to a man who makes judgment calls based on the shape of a nose or the color of a hoodie. I decided I did not." Pendleton was losing control of the narrative. He was trying to paint her as the angry black woman, but she was giving him Ice Queen, and the jury respected the Ice Queen. He decided to gamble. "Your Honor," Pendleton announced, a desperate glint in his eye. "The plaintiff calls a rebuttal witness. Someone who was on the plane that night, someone who saw the whole interaction, not just the part Miss Caroline's lawyers selected for the video." Audrey's brow furrowed slightly. There was no one else in the cabin. The flight attendant hadn't come out of the galley. "Who?" Thorne whispered to his associate. "The plaintiff calls Sarah Jenkins, the flight attendant of N700EV. Pendleton announced triumphantly. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. A young woman walked in. She looked terrified. She was wearing a modest dress. Clutching her purse tightly, she walked past Sterling, who gave her a reassuring nod, a nod that said, "Stick to the script we discussed." Audrey watched the exchange. She saw the nod, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine anger sparked in her eyes. Sterling wasn't just a bigot. He was a manipulator. He had coerced his crew. But Sterling had made another miscalculation. He assumed loyalty could be bought or bullied. He didn't know that Audrey Caroline didn't just buy planes. She did background checks on everyone who stepped foot on them. She knew things about Sarah Jenkins that Sterling didn't. And as Sarah took the stand, trembling, Audrey leaned over to Marcus Thorne and whispered 3 words that would turn the next chapter into a bloodbath. "Ask about the heater." The courtroom air had grown stale, recycled through the vents like the same tired arguments Arthur Pendleton was peddling. But the arrival of Sarah Jenkins injected a fresh, sharp current of anxiety into the room. She was young, barely 25, with blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun that seemed to pull her skin too tight. She looked fragile. She looked like the perfect victim. Captain Sterling watched her from the plaintiff's table, his expression one of paternal encouragement. It was a mask. Under the table, his fist was clenched so tight his fingernails were digging crescents into his palm. He needed her to hold the line. "Ms. Jenkins." Pendleton began gently, his voice losing its gravelly edge, adopting a soothing, uncle-like tone. "Thank you for coming today. I know this is difficult." "It is," Sarah whispered into the microphone. Her voice trembled. "You were the flight attendant on board the Gulfstream N700 EV on the night of December 24th, correct?" "Yes, sir." "And where were you when Captain Sterling first engaged with the defendant, Miss Caroline?" "I was in the forward galley," Sarah said, her eyes darting toward Audrey and then quickly away. "I was prepping the catering. The door was open, but the curtain was partially drawn." "Could you hear the interaction?" "Yes, clearly." "Ms. Jenkins." Pendleton leaned in. Captain Sterling testified that Miss Caroline was belligerent, that she refused instructions. Miss Caroline claims she was calm. "Who is telling the truth?" Sarah took a shaky breath. She looked at Sterling. He gave her a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. "Do it." "The captain is telling the truth," she said, her voice gaining a fraction more strength. "The woman, Miss Caroline, she was very aggressive." She started shouting almost immediately. She told the captain to get out of her face. She used profanity. A ripple of murmurs went through the jury. This contradicted the video. But the video had no audio. It was surveillance footage only. The jury had to decide if the body language matched the testimony. "Did you hear Captain Sterling threaten her?" Pendleton asked. "No," Sarah lied. "He was firm. He told her she needed to move for safety reasons. He was trying to be professional, but she threw a water bottle at him." Gasp. Audrey's eyebrows shot up. She looked at Marcus Thorne. Thorne was scribbling furiously, a predator sensing a trap. "She threw a water bottle?" Pendleton repeated, feigning shock. "We didn't see that on the video." It happened in the blind spot," Sarah stammered, improvising. "Just before the camera angle picks up seat 1A. She threw it, and it hit the bulkhead. That's when the captain raised his voice. He was scared. We were all scared. She seemed unstable." "Thank you, Ms. Jenkins," Pendleton said, looking mournfully at the jury. "So, to be clear, a billionaire in a hoodie boarded your plane, screamed at your captain, threw objects, and then fired you all when you tried to maintain order?" "Yes," Sarah whispered. "I was fired the next day, too, just like the captain." "No further questions." Pendleton sat down, looking smug. He had muddied the waters. He had created a he said, she said, with a witness who seemed to have nothing to gain. Marcus Thorne stood up. He didn't rush. He buttoned his suit jacket slowly. He walked to the witness stand and placed his hands on the railing, leaning in close to Sarah Jenkins. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. "Ms. Jenkins," Thorne began softly, "perjury is a felony in the state of New Jersey. It carries a sentence of up to 5 years in prison." "Objection!" Pendleton shouted. "Counsel is intimidating the witness." "I am merely stating the law, Your Honor," Thorne replied coolly. He turned back to Sarah. "Ms. Jenkins, you just testified that Miss Caroline threw a water bottle. And yet, in the video we watched, Miss Caroline is holding a water bottle in her left hand the entire time. She never lets go of it until she stands up to leave. Are you suggesting she had a second secret water bottle? Sarah's eyes widened. She looked at Sterling. He looked away. Maybe I was mistaken about the bottle, she mumbled. It happened so fast. Mistaken, Thorne repeated. Okay, let's talk about something else. You said you were fired the next day, just like the captain. Is that true? Yes, I got the email. Ms. Jenkins, Thorne said, his voice dropping to a hush. Do you know what a separation agreement is? Yes. Did you sign one with the aviation management company? Yes. And did that agreement include a severance package? Yes. How much was that package, Ms. Jenkins? Sarah swallowed hard. 6 months, pay. 6 months. Thorne nodded. Generous. And was there a condition attached to that money? A clause regarding truthful cooperation in any future inquiries? I think so. Now, Thorne walked back to his table and picked up a document. It wasn't a legal brief. It was a flight log. Let's talk about the heater. Captain Sterling's head snapped up. The heater? Sarah asked, confused. Yes, on a flight 3 weeks prior to Christmas. November 2nd, Teterboro to Miami. You were the flight attendant on that leg too, correct? With Captain Sterling? Yes. On that flight, the cabin heater malfunctioned. It was stuck on high. The cabin temperature reached 85 degrees. Do you remember that? Yes, it was very hot. And do you remember what Captain Sterling asked you to do? Sarah froze. Her face went gray. Ms. Jenkins? Thorne pressed, his voice hard now. You are under oath. What did Captain Sterling ask you to do to the maintenance log regarding that heater? Sarah looked at Sterling. He was glaring at her, his eyes burning with a warning. Shut up! But Sarah Jenkins looked at Audrey Caroline. Audrey wasn't glaring. She was watching Sarah with an expression of pity. Audrey knew. She knew because she had audited the maintenance logs when she bought the plane. She saw the falsified entries. Sarah's voice broke. He told me not to log it. Why? Because, tears welled up in her eyes. Because if we logged it, the plane would be grounded for repairs. And he had a date in Miami. He didn't want to lose the charter. So he told me to lie. He told me to say the sensor was just glitchy. So, Thorne said, his voice booming now, Captain Sterling ordered you to falsify federal maintenance records to suit his personal schedule. He put the safety of that aircraft at risk because he had a date. Thorne pointed a finger at Sterling. And isn't it true, Ms. Jenkins, that he threatened you then too? Didn't he tell you that if you logged that heater, he would make sure you never flew again? Sarah was sobbing now. Yes. He said he'd ruin me. He said flight attendants are a dime a dozen, but captains are gods. I was scared. And are you scared now, Miss Jenkins? Thorne asked gently. Is that why you lied about the water bottle? Did Captain Sterling tell you to come here and lie to protect him? Objection! Pendleton screamed. This is hearsay. It goes to the credibility of the witness and the plaintiff, Thorne shouted back. The judge slammed her gavel. Overruled! The witness will answer. Sarah looked at the judge, tears streaming down her face. Then she looked at Sterling. The spell was broken. The fear of prison outweighed the fear of the captain. Yes, she sobbed. He called me last night. He told me if I didn't back him up, he'd sue me too. He said I had to say she was crazy. But she wasn't. She was nice. She just wanted to sleep. He was the one screaming. He used a racial slur after she left. The courtroom erupted. Chaos. Pure, unadulterated chaos. Reporters were typing furiously on their phones. The jury was whispering openly, looking at Sterling with undisguised revulsion. Judge Reynolds was banging her gavel like a blacksmith, demanding order. Order! Order in this court, or I will clear the gallery. Captain Sterling sat slumped in his chair. The mask of the confident aviator had completely disintegrated. He looked old, small and pathetic. He had gambled everything on Sarah's fear, and he had lost. Arthur Pendleton was rubbing his temples. He knew the case was dead. He leaned over to Sterling. "We need to settle. Now. Before this gets to a verdict. They're going to crucify you." "No," Sterling hissed, his eyes wild. "She's lying. They're all lying." "It's over, Richard," Pendleton snapped. But Marcus Thorne wasn't done. He waited for the room to quiet down. He waited until Sarah Jenkins had been escorted off the stand, still weeping, by the bailiff. "Your Honor," Thorne said, his voice calm amidst the storm, "we have one final piece of evidence." A piece of evidence that Captain Sterling, arrogant to the last, forgot existed. He held up a small USB drive. Captain Sterling assumed the cabin video had no audio. He assumed that because the privacy mode switch was engaged in the cabin. And he was right. Partially. Thorne turned to the jury. The cabin microphones were off. However, Thorne smiled. The cockpit voice recorder, the CVR, is never off when the engines are spooling, and the cockpit door was open. Sterling's head jerked up. The CVR records the last 2 hours of audio in the cockpit, Thorne explained. And because the cockpit door was open during the altercation, the ambient microphones in the flight deck picked up the shouting in the cabin. It's faint, but with digital enhancement, it is undeniable. Thorne plugged the drive into the court's AV system. Defense Exhibit C. The cockpit voice recorder audio from December 24, 2023. The courtroom held its breath. Static hissed through the speakers. Then, the sound of wind. Then, a voice. Sterling's voice, clear, angry, and dripping with venom. "I don't care who you claim to be. You are a security risk." Then, Audrey's voice. Calm, muffled, but audible. "I am Audrey Caroline. I own this plane." Then, the sound that sealed Sterling's fate. A loud, mocking laugh from Sterling. "Own it? You people think you can own everything just because you got a little affirmative action money. Get your ass to the back, or I'll have the cops drag you off. You don't belong in the captain's chair, and you don't belong in my world." The audio cut to static. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't tense. It was final. It was the silence of a coffin lid closing. "You people," Thorne said, his voice echoing in the hush. "Affirmative action money." He turned to Sterling, who was staring at the table, his face a mask of defeat. "You didn't fire her because she was rude, Captain. You tried to humiliate her because you couldn't stand the idea that she was your boss. You saw a black woman in power, and your instinct was to strip that power away. And when she fired you for it, you tried to use the legal system to victimize yourself." Thorne looked at the jury. "This man is not a victim. He is a bully who got caught. And he is asking you to reward his bigotry with $5 million. I ask you to send him home with exactly what he deserves. Nothing." Thorne sat down. The judge looked at Pendleton. "Counsel, do you have any redirect?" Pendleton stood up slowly. He looked at his client, then at the jury, then at the judge. He closed his folder. "No, Your Honor. The plaintiff rests." The trial was effectively over. All that was left was the verdict, and the final twist that Audrey Caroline had been saving for the very end. She wasn't just going to win. She was going to make sure Captain Sterling never forgot the name Caroline. The jury deliberation took less than 45 minutes. In the world of complex civil litigation, that wasn't a decision. That was a stampede. When the foreperson, a middle-aged schoolteacher with stern glasses, stood up to read the verdict, Captain Richard Sterling didn't even stand. He sat slumped, staring at the grain of the wood on the defense table, his expensive suit now looking like a costume for a role he no longer knew how to play. In the matter of Sterling versus Caroline Oryx Systems, the foreperson read, her voice ringing clear, "On the count of wrongful termination, we find in favor of the defendant, Audrey Caroline." Sterling flinched. "On the count of defamation of character, we find in favor of the defendant, Audrey Caroline." Arthur Pendleton sighed, closing his eyes. Furthermore, the foreperson continued, flipping a page, regarding the defendant's countersuit for breach of contract, fraud, and emotional distress, we find in favor of the defendant. Sterling's head snapped up. The countersuit. In the heat of the exposure, he had almost forgotten about it. Audrey hadn't just defended herself. She had sued him back for the cost of the flight delay, the legal fees, and the damage to the company's reputation. "We award the defendant damages in the amount of $1.2 million to be paid by the plaintiff, Richard Sterling." A gasp rippled through the gallery. $1.2 million. It was everything he had. His pension, his savings, his house in the Hamptons. Gone. The judge banged the gavel. Court is adjourned. The room erupted into noise, but for Sterling, the world had gone silent. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Pendleton. "I'll file the appeal paperwork, Richard, but, honestly, you don't have the money to pay me to write it. You're on your own." Pendleton packed his briefcase and walked away, leaving his client alone at the table. Across the aisle, Audrey Caroline was shaking hands with Marcus Thorne. She didn't look happy. She looked resolved. She packed her legal pad, picked up her bag, and began to walk toward the exit. She had to pass Sterling's table to leave. As she approached, Sterling stood up. His face was a mask of ruin, red-rimmed eyes, trembling lips. The arrogance was completely excised, leaving only a desperate, broken man. "Miss Caroline," he croaked. Audrey stopped. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Captain Sterling, you ruined me," he whispered, his voice shaking with a mix of rage and self-pity. 30 years. I flew safely for 30 years. And you took it all. The money. The house. It's all I have. Are you happy? Does it feel good to crush the little guy?" Audrey studied him for a moment. The courtroom had quieted down, sensing one final confrontation. "You aren't the little guy, Richard," she said, her voice calm but carrying to the back of the room. "You were the captain. You held all the power in the sky. You held the lives of your crew and passengers in your hands. And you used that power to bully a woman because you didn't like her hoodie. You coerced a young flight attendant into perjury. You falsified safety records." She took a step closer. "I didn't ruin you. You ruined yourself the moment you decided that your ego was more important than your integrity. The money? The house? That's the cost of your arrogance." Sterling looked down, unable to meet her gaze. I can't pay it. I'll be destitute." Audrey looked at him. This was the moment where most people would gloat, where they would twist the knife. But Audrey Caroline hadn't become a billionaire by being petty. She had done it by being strategic. "I know you can't pay it," Audrey said softly. Sterling looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "So," Audrey continued, "I'm willing to offer you a deal." "A deal?" Sterling asked, breathless. "I will forgive the $1.2 million judgment," Audrey said. The courtroom gasped again. Even Marcus Thorne looked surprised. "I will waive the debt. You can keep your house. You can keep your pension." Sterling stared at her, stunned. "Why? After everything I said?" "Because I don't need your money, Richard," Audrey said coldly. "And I don't want your suffering. But there is a condition." "Anything," Sterling said quickly. "I'll sign anything." "You will surrender your pilot's license to the FAA voluntarily," Audrey said. "Permanent revocation. You will never sit in a cockpit again. Not for me, not for NetJets, not for a crop duster." Sterling recoiled as if she had slapped him. Flying is my life. It's who I am." "No," Audrey corrected him. "It was your job, and you proved you aren't fit for it. You have a choice, Richard. You can be a broke pilot with no one to hire him, or you can be a retired man with his dignity intact. But you will not fly, not while I have a say in it." Sterling looked at her. He saw the steel in her eyes. He realized she wasn't negotiating. She was grounding him. Slowly, painfully, he nodded. I accept. Audrey nodded once. Mr. Thorne will have the papers drawn up by the morning. Goodbye, Mr. Sterling. She turned and walked out of the courtroom, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Outside, the winter sun was blindingly bright. The press was waiting at the bottom of the steps, a sea of cameras and microphones. Miss Caroline! Miss Caroline! Is it true you forgave the debt? Miss Caroline, what do you have to say to other CEOs? Audrey stopped at the microphones. She adjusted her sunglasses. I have one thing to say, she said, looking directly into the lens of the nearest camera. Respect isn't about the uniform you wear or the seat you sit in. It's about how you treat people when you think no one is watching. Captain Sterling thought he was dealing with the help. He forgot that without the help, the plane doesn't fly. If you're a leader, remember that. And if you're an employee, never let anyone make you feel small in a space you earned the right to be in. She smiled, a genuine, warm smile. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a plane to catch, and this time, I'm flying it myself. She walked toward her waiting car, leaving the stunned reporters behind. The final shot is of the Gulfstream G700 soaring into the clouds, banking sharply toward the horizon, free and unencumbered, climbing higher than Richard Sterling could ever dream of reaching again. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of how one arrogant captain learned the hardest lesson of his life. Never judge a book by its cover, and never judge a boss by her hoodie. Audrey Caroline didn't just win a lawsuit. She dismantled a system of entitlement and stood up for everyone who has ever been dismissed, overlooked, or disrespected. She showed us that true power isn't about shouting orders. It's about knowing exactly who you are, even when the world tries to tell you otherwise. Karma didn't just hit Captain Sterling. It grounded him forever. Wow, what a satisfying ending, right? If you enjoyed seeing justice served ice cold, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Have you ever been judged by your appearance or treated poorly by someone who didn't know who you really were? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want more stories of instant karma, revenge, and courtroom drama, don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.